experience. Hello and welcome to Inside the Learning Experience, the podcast dedicated to exploring innovative ideas shaping education today. Our goal is to deliver direct insights into learning innovation to educators, designers, and institutional leaders, equipping them with the tools and knowledge to enhance their practices and foster greater educational impact. I'm your host, Omid Fotuhi, the Director of Learning Innovation here at WGU Labs. And today I am thrilled to introduce our guest, Katrina Wehr, a seasoned learning experience researcher and design professional. Katrina describes herself as a tempered, radical passionate about centering people in technology design. Her unique background in journalism, research, and design allows her to deeply engage with people, understand their context, and create highly personalized, responsive learning experiences. In today's conversation, we'll explore Katrina's innovative research on passive, ambient, and integrated assessment and discuss the promising implications of her project in partnerships with the Learning Design Alliance and some of the other projects within WGU Labs. Katrina, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thanks. I'm excited.
As we dive in, Katrina, a common question I have for our guests is, walk me through your own personal and professional path that brought you to this particular area of your focus in your career, as well as your focus on assessment as you're thinking about this new space that we have in education in the current landscape.
I guess it kind of goes all the way back to when I was in high school. I took some online courses to help prepare me for college and fill up some time in my schedule. I went to a really small rural school, so we were really lucky to have the online class or the online institution connection with our local community college. And so through that experience, I was able to finish almost a year of college before I actually graduated from high school, which set me up really well to have a successful college transition, finish my degree in 3 years, and kind of sparked my interest in education and specifically online learning. I just really loved the fact that I could sit in my high school study lab and get work done at my own pace and have that time and space to be reflective. Back then, this would have been the mid-aughts. A lot of online learning was asynchronous, so I find myself really, I express myself well writing. And so because that was like the dominant medium of the time, I found just a very easy time getting through some of those classes. And it really was just a great way to learn. And so when I was able to specialize, when I got my master's degree, I did that online as well. And it just kind of set me on this path of wanting to be able to provide that same experience and that access to people who otherwise would not be able to get an education, beyond their public school. So that brought me to, I've worked at Drexel, I've worked at Penn State in various online learning support roles. And then I made it here to Labs. And this is where I really got to dig in and chew on some really interesting research questions. And that's what brings me to the assessment work that we're doing. One of the things that was also a hallmark, I feel like, of some of those early online learning experiences was either a lot of writing or a lot of just taking multiple choice tests. And I think as I had more experience in different disciplines and supporting more nuanced types of learning and different delivery styles, working with different faculty, and as technology grows, of course, right? There's so many more things that you can do with assessment and so many more ways to showcase your learning that this part of our work really is really inspiring, and it's exciting to see what we can do at WGU.
So before we dive into some of the other questions, Katrina, I wonder if you can help us unpack what assessment really is and how it's used.
Yeah, so that's a great starting point. There are generally two types of assessment. If you talk to folks in the field, they will tell you there's formative assessment, which is supposed to be ongoing, kind of like think about your traditional like midterm exam. Formative assessment, you're halfway through the semester, here's where you're at. And then you got summative assessment, which comes at the end. So final exam, that's like the summation of everything that you should have gleaned from the learning experience up to that point. And so often is used, with a pass or fail grade. And that's your determination of whether you're going to move forward in your program or if you need to retake the class, or, if you're somewhere in between and, you're far enough along that you'll be fine. But so those are like kind of the two main forms that we see. And then, of course, in layman's terms, I guess we could talk about them as it could be like a writing like a paper, taking a multiple choice test. There could be a project. Maybe there's a case study. I've seen like even group projects, if they're very extensive and in depth, be used as assessments before as well. So I think that's kind of where we're at right now with assessment.
I do want to just sort of row upstream for a moment and get your thoughts on the online versus in person. I mean, you've already highlighted some of the benefits in terms of flexibility, in terms of preferences of learning. Um, what do you think about this medium of learning as it currently stands, and where it might be headed? Just any thoughts there?
Having experienced both, and I feel like I've done one degree fully residential, I've done another degree fully online, and then my PhD was a mix of both. I think there are definitely advantages to being residential, especially as an undergraduate. I feel like I just needed that time and space and that access to faculty to really build that foundational knowledge base of the field and build those connections and network and all of those things. There's a lot of skills that I think you can learn when you do have the privilege of being able to focus solely on your education and how to become a professional and how to be part of your field and interact in the ways and the norms of whatever that may be. But I would not have been able to continue on beyond my bachelor's degree if it wasn't for online options. And so that alone, I think the ability to work and support myself while I was pursuing more education instead of taking on more debt. I mean, that was like the reason I was able to even achieve the things that I've done already. So to think about where I would be without online learning, I think it's hard, and I know that that's something that a lot of people face, is like if you have to make that choice between working or supporting your family or being there in a caregiving role for extended family and things like that, or getting your degree to help set you up for a more prosperous life. It's tough. So I think that's where there's still a ways to go, I think, in integrating tools and making sure that access is actually equitable in the ways that I think might be overblown in some statements. But that I think it's better to have the option and have the opportunity than it is to not have it. So it's definitely a space we need to keep working in.
Hearing you speak, I couldn't help but just reflect on the fact that you were a person who was motivated to learn. You found the opportunity in a traditional higher ed institution that took you so far, and then you wanted to continue that learning, and it seems as though there was a gap in access. And I find that balance between the desire to learn and the institutions being there to grant you access is an interesting tension, because all of us want to learn, all of us want to continue our growth, and yet the restricted access comes from the institution. And I think you've heard me say this, Katrina, but I think at the heart of it, it has to do with the validation or verification of the learning around which the institution is built. And if you break down to the core tool that is used for that verification, it comes down to the assessment. And within this, also, I think you're starting to see a different kind of juxtaposition between learning and assessment, which become available for different purposes. As we mentioned, people are motivated to learn, they want to keep going, and yet they have to go through assessment in order to get access to the institution. And I know that in your work and thinking about integrating assessment and learning, you've been thinking about this, but I'm curious to know, as you think about what you imagine being possible now or into the future, what does that world look like as you navigate these different dynamics of learning, the institutional access, the verification of learning and mastery? How does assessment play a role in all of that?
Yeah, it's something I actually have spent a lot of time thinking about. And I think an idealized vision of that is really that assessment and learning are like a continuous part of our lives. I think, especially as we've observed, even the last like 5 years, the leaps and bounds that technology has grown and changed the way we work and the kind of work that we do, that need for constant access to learning and that constant assessment and verification of new skills is going to be really important. I don't think it's going to go away. And I think it's going to be even more tied. We're not going to just have your university that you spend 4 years, maybe 6 years at, and then you're done. We're going to have these long-term relationships with these places where we have access to these skills and the knowledge and the connections and all of that. And so what I think is really advantageous about a future where that is accepted and what we all expect when we matriculate through, K-12, is that you'll have a lot of opportunity to really ground your learning in like contextually relevant areas like your workplace. And so having that ability to showcase the things that you're learning in a workplace context that really kind of aligns well to what you're doing, and it shows you that as a learner you have a place to apply those skills, and that instant verification and feedback and validation of like, oh, I actually am learning something and like I'm putting it to use right away. And the fact that I have done that allows me to reflect back on the next thing that I go to learn. It's such a rich way of taking in new information and learning new things and making your work hopefully more fruitful for yourself, but also more productive for the folks in your circle too.
If anything, you just kind of made me also realize that assessment, in addition to the validation of the learning, sometimes when used effectively can also be a motivator, because it demonstrates to you and to others that you are gaining new mastery, you are learning more of the content. We all sort of navigate our worlds trying to figure out, are we good enough? Can I do this? Those are the questions that we ask ourselves. And so assessment presumably could serve in that role, although I will argue that it doesn't always serve in that role effectively. In fact, when I think of how most people experience assessment, they are filled with anxiety, with fear of failing, and not a lot of learning that's baked around those final and big stakes assessments. I know that you're doing some work at Labs, and I know that you've been part of projects and research that is trying to unpack the experiences of individuals and the possibilities of new tools and innovations in addressing some of these factors. Can you share a little bit about some of the work that you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of my favorite parts of the work that I've been part of so far is being able to talk directly with students about their experiences with assessment. That's just something, as a learning designer and somebody in the field, where when you can hear it from a student directly, that is just kind of your greatest source of truth, right? So one of the things that's really stuck with me, I can share a couple of anecdotes, but the one that really motivates me and drives the way that I think about some of the questions that we're tackling around assessment currently are students who have a very distinct or a very clear goal. That they have a career step that they're trying to make, or they have a small business that they're trying to start, or some like really concrete need for why they're seeking education. But one of the complaints that I hear when I interview students is that assessments can take up so much of their time. It's like one of the parts of the learning experience that you study for. So that's like your time. Often, depending on the type of assessment, especially in our model at WGU, it's something where they need to schedule out a specific hour, 2 hours, maybe even 3 of their day. So just set aside and dedicate to like doing this assessment. And for some students, when they take these assessments, they want that time to feel like it matters for more than just that checkbox of like, I'm ready to move on to the next thing. One of the, I'm not going to get the quote right, but the gist of what one of the students that I talked to explained is that they would really love to be able to showcase something that they put so much time in for an assessment and have it be relevant enough to their career that they could take it to an interview and show an interviewer like, this is my evidence that I can do the thing that you're hiring me for. It's all right here, maybe in like a portfolio or, in some other artifact that, it really does kind of provide that show instead of, just having to explain and hope and rely on that employer's faith in the institution that things are aligned properly and that certification of skill is really there. You'd never walk into an interview and show like a multiple choice test and be like, look, I got an A on my bubble filling. That's not something that we do. But to be able to have a presentation or an infographic or some other type of deliverable that really you can explain like how you tie in those skills and how you're strategically thinking about the needs of like the case or whatever. That's something that's way more concrete. It allows you to have a really great conversation with an employer. And those are the kind of things that's a lot of students that I've talked to wish they could spend all of those study hours and all of that objective assessment time or even rounds of revision on performance assessments, that they want an artifact that they can take with them. That's not just so restricted to one class and one snapshot and one moment.
Reminded of some of the work by Carol Dweck on mindset, actually, when I hear you speak, where she talks about the motivations that people have and how they view their latent qualities like intelligence. And that's something that's informed by our society and our culture. We're told what's important, so we kind of try to gear ourselves towards what we think is important. And if you're told that what matters is grades and outcomes, then essentially that's where you become motivated to prove to others that that's what you can do. But we rarely ever spend time encouraging, incentivizing, and nurturing the process side of things, like the effort that you took or the different strategies that you took. And so in many ways, we're taking this rich learning experience and we're overly simplifying it into the single dimension of how you can perform on a written test, which is not at all reflective of the learning itself. And I'm wondering again, as you're thinking about this work, recognizing that assessment is still a big part of being able to verify and validate, potentially even motivate mastery along the way. What are some of the promises that you're seeing in the projects that you're involved with, or some of the innovations that you see in the landscape?
I think one of the things that I'm most excited about is like the customization potential for people. I think with the technology we have available and the things that we're looking into here at Labs, the ability to take competencies, learning objectives, whatever that core structure of the program is, and really help students figure out ways to personalize it, adapt it to their context, work their goals into it to try to build some of that intrinsic motivation is something that's really interesting to me. I also think the ability to capture elements of the process is something that the technology can allow us to do now that was previously really challenging to do at a level that is required when you are teaching many students. And I think one of the other things that might be, I don't know if we're there quite yet, but I'm really excited to see whether we are able to have students get to a point where they identify a gap in their own understanding or their own professional development or personal development, and can they use the technology that we have available to like build their own program or build their own curriculum to fill in those very specific, maybe niche holes in their knowledge that they perceive, or even things that they just would like to build more confidence in. And whether that leads to a very pretty packaged degree that has a clever name stamped on it, or if it's just something where it's like, hey, I did XYZ classes or exercises or activities, and I generated these artifacts from that experience to like fill these gaps that I perceive that I have. That's something that I think is, maybe we're farther off, but we're definitely laying the foundations to get there at some point.
Well, let's really try to push that thinking in a far off way. Can you tell me what you imagine 10, 15, 20 years from now and the role of assessment in the learning experience?
I think for me, what I would hope for is that assessment is really for a student or a learner to kind of figure out where are you actually perhaps, I don't want to use deficit language, but deficient, or something where you have more opportunities to grow, versus skills that maybe your perception's off, right? Like, we all have our blind spots, the things that we're good at. And so, focusing your time and energy on the things that are really going to fill in any gaps that you have, I think is something that would be advantageous. And I think that part of part of like the scary part of assessment we've kind of been talking around is like understanding where those weaknesses are. So I wonder about in the future if there is a way to like normalize assessment because it is such an intrinsic part of the experience, and it's something that it doesn't just happen once, but happens a bunch of times throughout whatever the time boxed portion of learning that occurs, is that you become not like desensitized, but like that anxiousness or that feeling of judgment goes away, and that it's really this experience that's meant to show you where you stand and how far you can go, and also like a look back at like where you started and how far you've already come. So that's something that I hope in the future we do, is kind of make assessment less scary and less of a snapshot and more of a like scrapbook of you turn the pages and see the growth instead of just that one time, one shot, one opportunity, one chance to prove what you've done.
I thought you were going to break out in some M&M rap there for a second. But, and I think what you've done is really explained the original intent of assessment, right? You have to kind of observe how someone is doing with the intent of giving them feedback so that they can improve, where the goal is helping them improve. But I think where you're saying the weight is when that same assessment now becomes the determinant of whether you have access, whether you can pass the class, whether you can get that degree. And that's where the weight comes. And so it's interesting how hearing you speak, because you still see the value of assessment in providing feedback, but you recognize the burden and the stress that it causes when it's used as a validation for continued access, which is kind of what we started off talking about. As you think about that tension, imagine what an administrator or an educator who is tasked with essentially fulfilling both jobs of giving you feedback, but also making sure that you're making due progress to be able to master and move on. Any recommendations for those decision makers about how they should be thinking about assessment, some new tools or innovations that are coming down the pipeline that you think might be exciting?
I think honestly, when I'm in a teaching role or an evaluation role like that, I would want to give learners the opportunity to really demonstrate from like a 360-degree view, like what do you know? Maybe you're not a great writer, but you could give a wonderful speech about what you've learned in a course, and at the end of the day you're still communicating what you've learned. So I think that's like, it's about giving multiple opportunities. It's about measuring growth. And one of the things I don't love about how assessment sometimes gets used is like, it's has this like perceived ranking, right? It's like you stand here on this, in this group of people, and some of those people are up here and others are back here. I think it should be more about where you started and where you at and where you can go. And that's, something really individualized and very difficult to do at scale. But I think with the way that technology is growing and changing and allowing us to crunch huge data sets in, seconds or minutes, that feels like it's more in reach. So I think it's about giving students, if you're in that role of like being an educator or an admin, it's about giving students the multiple opportunities to represent where they've come, and helping them really target like, you've made this far, you have this far to go, and less about, on the scale of A to F, you have a C. Yeah.
And I wonder if part of that less frequent assessment delivery is that it just costs time and money to develop those. I'm hearing you talk about some of the advances with technology and just greater access to this wealth of data and materials. Maybe there isn't a feasible way of solving for that problem where it doesn't cost as much to create assessments so that you can deliver them more frequently. Just with that, can you speak a little bit about some of the projects you're working on specifically at Labs that might be related to the assessment and what's possible?
Yeah, I think the one that I'm most excited about right now, still kind of in the early stages, but we've done a lot of thinking and a lot of, small scale proof of concept that's possible, is the infusion of AI into XAPI. XAPI is the Learner Experience API, and it's something that's been around for a long time. It lets you kind of build in little checkpoints into learning materials and helps track learners throughout their interactions in an ecosystem. What AI has changed about the X API is that those statements can kind of be generated on the fly. And so when we think about a model where the learning content is different for every student, using AI allows the X API in the back end to also flex in the same ways. And so I think that is something where when I talk about things like having a 360-degree picture of a student's progress from like where they started to where they landed in the end of whatever time frame they're with us in their content, that's something I see a lot of potential in. I still think there's a lot of technical levers and buttons that need to be pushed to get it working perfectly, but that is data that we've had for a long time, but at amounts that were just not feasible to analyze in any meaningful way prior, especially not for folks who are at a small institution supporting large numbers of courses with limited resources, and certainly not at large places where there's like vast numbers of students and they're generating tons of data. And so I think that infusion of AI into like experience design and the XAPI is something that's really powerful, and I'm excited to see that work grow and hopefully carry us through many cycles of research and iteration.
I appreciate you walking through the technical definition of some of those terms. Can you walk me through what that might look like from a student's perspective? I'm a student, I log in, fill in the rest.
Yeah. So currently, and probably what most students would have experienced, you wouldn't really know that that's being tracked. It looks right now like page clicks, time spent on a site. It might look like the really generalized stats that an instructor might get from their LMS, but it's not anything super robust. I'm not aware of any projects currently going on where students are making like actionable use out of like XAPI data. It's really more for understanding like where are they spending their time, what are they doing, and how are any of those patterns significant? And if they are, in what ways are they significant? And there's a lot of questions that you can ask about data, and a lot of things that you can question about how valid it is. But I think with being able to put more of those opportunities into learning materials, and even the ability to push students or nudge them to document experiences that they have outside of the walled garden of the LMS, is something that adds a lot more data. So the need for computing and crunching that data, but also just like a way to seamlessly integrate that everywhere is somewhere that you're learning, not just when you're sitting in front of the screen clicking buttons and reading pages of online content. So that's, I guess, kind of a really vague picture of what it might look like and how I hope it might look in the future.
And you touch on just the incredible capabilities that we have at our disposal. Our phones alone are processing incredible amounts of information and data. There's all of these servers that are capable of mind-blowing processing speeds and volume that was just impossible even a few years ago. And what you're highlighting is that we really are at the dawn of capabilities that we never really imagined before. And I keep thinking about the way that AI came on the scene. It was initially a tool that they were testing on Amazon reviews, and what they wanted to do was to see, hey, could we just like get this artificial intelligence to replicate reviews that people are leaving for products. And what ended up happening is when they fed it enough data, that in order for the artificial intelligence to be able to generate those reviews, it had to infer sentiment. And that's something that it did organically and automatically in order to do the job that it was tasked with. This ability to make inferences is one of those capabilities that we're just starting to scratch the surface for, in that we really might be in a place 5-10 years from now where it can infer your learning. And it can also infer things like uncertainty or doubt or hesitation based on some of the XAPIs that you just mentioned. It really seems like a very promising and exciting future that we're about to embark on. I wonder, Katrina, in doing this work and thinking about the innovations and advances, as we think about the future, what are the things that get you most excited about the future of learning?
I think the really for me something that I always wish that I had throughout like my K-12 experience was like the ability to personalize and really have like a program that was adapted to me as opposed to feeling like I was one of 30 plus, kids in a classroom kind of trucking along with everybody else. And, could I go further if I had the individualized support, or all of that. And so I think that's what's exciting is if we start to build that way of thinking about education and learning from an early age. I think it will allow us to do a lot more and allow students to achieve a lot more later on if they do choose to pursue higher education. I think one of the hardest things right now is that students are coming into an ecosystem that's really different from the one that they're used to in like a K-12 environment. And so as this technology does grow and becomes more robust and more accessible and more integrated into the experience of learning from, your earliest years all the way through to, your retirement, I think that what I would love to see is like people who really do believe and buy into the fact that like learning is for the rest of your life, and it's not something that someone can tell you that you're bad at. It's just something that we all do in our different way, and we will have technology that can serve everybody in helping them learn in the ways that motivate them and help them feel fulfilled and help them apply their knowledge in the ways that are the most maximizing of what they're hoping to get out of why they even came for a degree in the first place.
I can't help but reflect on the fact that sometimes it feels like institutions are optimized for stability. They want to create standards, they want to create rules and regulations, and yet really what is at the heart of effective learning is that personalization, that feeling like you have someone who's watching and understands where you're struggling and where you're progressing. And so it's interesting and exciting to think about the capabilities that move us more towards having a feeling that we have more mentors and support and less like we need to comply with modules and standards. So that's exciting to be thinking about. Thank you for joining us, Katrina, and allowing us to be part of this really insightful conversation. And thank you for joining us at home on the Inside the Learning Experience podcast. We hope that today's discussion inspires you to innovate assessment practices in your educational context. Be sure to subscribe and join us next time as we continue to explore the groundbreaking ideas transforming the learning landscape. Thank you.